You're listening to The Donor Doctor Show, where your host, James Newberry, will help you improve the health of your fundraising. Now over to James.
Hello, this is The Donor Doctor, and I have a special treat with you. I have Rev Dr Elizabeth Foss. Is that the right rank? And
yes.
Of Cherrydale United Methodist Church. And we've known each other for a while. Went to high school, right? Patch Stuttgart and Patch American High School. You had Mr. Bruner and Mr. Manette. They're all excellent teachers. And then you went to the University of Virginia.
Major in
And
economics.
So that's in the news. And then you went to Emory University for your seminary, correct?
For my Master of Divinity.
Is that right?
And then Wesley for my Doctorate of Ministry.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Now, I remember you saying in seminary there was actually people that didn't really believe, but they just went anyway.
There were a lot of people who were seeking greater meaning.
Oh, okay. Well, it's kind of an expensive way to find meaning.
Certainly is.
But anyway, you've done well. You've got this nice church, Cherrydale Methodist Church.
I love it here.
Yeah,
this is a lovely congregation.
And you're telling me how it's confusing. There's a bunch of churches here, and sometimes you get people from the Baptist church down the road, and then they know that they have to be in the wrong church because they don't have women aren't Baptist ministers, right?
Not in that congregation, and so they will get up and leave when they realize they're in the wrong church.
I would stay for the service.
I would as well.
Just out of embarrassment.
I would as well.
But you were one of the first female Methodist ministers. Am I right?
Women have been ordained for just over 40 years, and I've been in ministry 28.
So relatively new.
Yeah, I was like the second wave.
Okay. Well, that's excellent. Now, I have a lot of interest in St. Paul as a direct mail copywriter. He's considered really the first fundraising copywriter. Now, he wrote a lot of...
he definitely started the fundraising letter.
One of them, earlier we talked with a friend of mine who's a Baptist minister about the book of Philemon, which is about slavery, about writing a letter to a slave owner to release a slave or to forgive him. But Paul's really probably more famous for Corinthians and other letters where he raises famine relief for the Christians in Jerusalem. Is that correct?
That's correct. He went to Jerusalem in the year 46 to deliver money from Antioch. Uh-huh. And then he spent 10 years after that raising funds to be delivered back to Jerusalem. And so he talks about that fundraising appeal in 1 Corinthians and in 2 Corinthians and 1 Timothy and in Romans.
One of the things that I find interesting about Paul is I took a class on Paul, and I would always skim over the beginning. He'd have this really effusive greeting. And now as a copywriter, I see that actually was a big part of it, was thanking them, making them feel good. Am I right?
Yeah, he wanted to connect people with mission. And so whenever people had been successful in mission or had been abundantly generous, both with their time and with their funds, he always affirmed that. Mostly he affirmed their faith and what was possible, but that grew out of that.
Now, he always had a great need, right? He lays out a need. That's one of the things he does in his letters.
The first thing he does is he lays out the need, and it's always a legitimate need.
Right.
The church in Jerusalem faced famine. They faced overcrowding. They faced all kinds of different issues, and so he would always lay that out.
Although they're both Christians, there was a divide, am I correct, between the more Gentile Christians of Corinth and the Jewish Christians of Jerusalem. Am I right?
Yeah, and it was one of the ways that demonstrated to the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem the faithfulness of Gentile Christians outside of
there
Jerusalem.
were one, yeah.
Yes.
And sort of like you give today maybe to somebody in a different country. It's not you're not a member of a country. You're part of a broader faith.
Right.
Interesting. Now,
you're all one in Christ Jesus, neither Jew nor Greek.
But also,
Yep.
even people outside the faith, there should be generosity.
Absolutely.
Now, he says that although he says that you should give out of abundance of joy. What's your motivation for giving?
Well, I mean, I always think back to John 21, where Jesus asks Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me? And 3 times Peter is allowed to say, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. And so I think Paul picks up on that theme. Do you love me? And what does that cause you to do? The feed my sheep part, it's not just what you think in your head, it's what you do. So if you love me, do something about it.
It's interesting. He uses some tools or techniques, though. He uses kind of a rivalry, like
the Macedonian. He mentions the Macedonian church to the Corinthians and says, "And wouldn't it be embarrassing if I brought some Macedonians with me next time and you didn't have an offering ready?"
There's a little bit of a rivalry, I know.
There's a little bit of a rivalry.
I know because the
Macedonian church was not having an easy time, and yet they were very generous, and so yes.
So that was considered, an appropriate thing. Nothing wrong with that. But the idea that you necessarily would get a blessing by giving was maybe the wrong reason to give. You were supposed to give because it's just the right thing to do. Am I right about that?
Because it was the right thing to do, and because of God's abundance of blessing toward each of us, that we should respond in generosity toward one another, that we're knit together as believers.
Now, I agree with you, but that's not a universal belief. There's a lot of people, I'm sure you've seen them on TV. You give them, $100, sow a seed of something, then you get back 10,000. But that's not what really Paul said.
Some people run a business, some people run a church. They're not the same.
I understand. Well, that's interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you said something, at seminary, you took a class on how to deliver a sermon or eulogy, right? You called it what? Homiletics. Now, you never took a fundraising class, though. They didn't offer fundraising classes.
That is correct. That was a big deficit, in my opinion.
Do they still not address fundraising, as far as you know?
As far as I know, they don't. It's interesting that churches are being really encouraged to be entrepreneurial in many ways. And I recently talked with a friend who's in seminary at a very prestigious Southern university, and hasn't changed at all.
Really?
Not at all.
That's a big flaw. Well, I think fundraising somehow is looked down upon.
And I don't know why. I mean, if we believe in our ministry, then we also have to believe in its need to be funded.
It's interesting. I went to the American Campaign Academy. It was only like a 3-month school, but they always emphasize the importance of fundraising. It was a big part of a political campaign. Mm-hmm. And they said a candidate should spend, I don't know, half their time, or it depends, but I imagine few ministers spend half their time or a quarter of their time on fundraising. Am I right? Or even 10%.
Yeah. No.
I mean, you have so many things. So
we do a once-a-year campaign, which feels like far too much for most pastors and most congregations.
Because it's raising money is a taboo subject, right?
Right. You don't talk about certain things. I mean, I wouldn't ask somebody how much money they made, but there are churches that do. I know a church in Charlottesville where you have to show your W-2 and they expect you to tithe, and they know what that amount should be, and that church is really growing.
Because they're demanding more of people.
They're demanding commitment. I don't know of any mainline Protestant churches that would ever do that.
It does seem a bit much.
It's very difficult to talk about money at all. I mean, I share with my congregation about my giving, mm-hmm. And just simply invite their reflection upon their own. I'm really grateful that this congregation is deeply committed to lots of hands-on ministry, so they see how far the money goes.
A lot of people like to give to particular projects, and giving them that opportunity to It's just like college. You might want to give to your particular college you were in, but you don't care about the business school. You might care about the science or whatever it is. Or you might want to give to your seminary, for instance.
Right. And it's much harder to raise money for operating funds than specific projects.
We've said that many times here.
And yet, many churches face dwindling numbers in their congregations, but have very large facilities to steward. And you don't want to use too much of your money to preserve the building, because we're not a museum. We're about ministry. We're about mission. And so we don't want to become guarded about giving away ourselves in love.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. In Europe, a lot of the churches have closed down, have become museums. It's kind of
they've turned
sad.
into hotels and restaurants and all sorts of things.
Well, it's better than tearing it down altogether. From that.
True.
Now, this one guy I really like is Gerald Panis. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he has this. He talks about asking and the importance of asking. And he says, I like this, need to ask in person. Can't milk a cow over the phone or with a letter. Need to be by their side to milk a cow. And this, of course, he's talking about major gifts. How have you asked people, individually for gifts, like plan giving, that kind of thing?
I have, if I know that somebody has a particular passion for a particular ministry.
Right. I like that. Yeah.
I like the opportunity to give when I'm passionate about something.
Well, targeting is good. I was a member of a Methodist church for about 10 years in Poolesville, Maryland, and I liked it. And there were several things that I thought that they did well. One is he would quote from John Wesley, because he felt uncomfortable himself talking about money, but he didn't feel uncomfortable invoking John Wesley and what his views on money. And I always thought that was interesting.
And John Wesley was a sacrificial giver. I mean, there were 2 years when he lived completely on potatoes so that he could give the money that he would have spent on food to people who were
But John
starving.
Wesley didn't think it was bad if you had money. He thought it was an opportunity to be generous.
Right.
I mean, there are some people, obviously, even in the Bible, you comes across like a rich man is harder to get, I'm sure you're familiar with that. So it's kind of in between that view and the view that God favors those. There's an opposite extreme that God favors people who are wealthy. You know what I'm saying? You've seen that. I mean, I'm not saying it's biblical, but, that's a popular belief nowadays among certain churches, right?
Well, I mean, it was popular in Jesus' day, and he was always having to confront that belief that if you were blessed in any way with good health, it was because of God's favor. And if you were in ill health, or if you were poor, or that was obviously either a punishment from God or some sort of reflection upon the purity of your life. And Jesus was confronting that all of the time. All of the time he is denouncing that particular set of beliefs.
Now, even though I said it's important to ask in person, I agree with that. I still think that mail has an important role in it. It's interesting that church used to have a newsletter, physical, hand newsletter they would mail, right. And to save money, they discontinued it. Do you have a newsletter?
We do have a newsletter. We predominantly send it out by email, and we mail about 70 copies.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if it's just there, but they didn't. They did do it by email, but then they didn't really make much of an effort to get the email addresses. So it was unfortunate. So it's giving that idea. I mean, they did some things well, but it just seems like a taboo subject. The more you talk about it, done tastefully, obviously, you don't want to seem like you're exploiting, but it's really hard to. I think the mistake people make is they wilt, like they're worried about any kind of backlash, any kind of criticism. And you really have to know that you're going to get some, if you're going to be successful, somebody's going to be bothered. If you get somebody in somebody's will, the kids that would have inherited may be unhappy. Who knows? That might have been the desire of the deceased. It was, right? Mm-hmm. But so there's just no way to be involved in this without getting some blowback.
Yeah, I think a lot of pastors are reticent about approaching the topic because they are told that my church only contacts me once a year, and it's because they want money. And so I sincerely hope that is not true. I hope churches are in contact with their members, whether they see them on a regular basis, and that they receive mailings that keep them abreast of all of the ministries and happenings in the parish. But sometimes I wonder if people say that just because they don't really want to think about their giving, that's a difficult topic for them to think about. So they don't like anyone asking because it makes them think about it.
Well, they don't want to give. That's the way to give around for giving.
And it's hard. I mean, tithing is hard. I tithe and it's hard.
Oh, I understand. I was,
but I mean, I don't, like, my cable bill went up dramatically this month, and I don't like giving more money to the cable company, but the check that I write to the church every month is the happiest check I write all month.
Well, that's what they say, that giving is actually, people feel blessed. They feel they say endorphins. I don't know all this, but stuff I've heard that people often feel happy.
I think about all of the things that money does, and that makes me happy. I mean, especially the hands-on ministries that we do at this church, it just makes me happy. We made a decision a couple of years ago that all of our hands-on mission projects had to be projects that children, youth, and adults could do together. Mm-hmm. And it is exciting to me to see 2-year-olds and 102-year-olds together working on a project. It's a wonderful thing. I see children being discipled. I see adults mentoring and all of it because we're answering the same question Peter answered. Yes, right. Lord, you know that I love you. So it makes me happy.
Well, that's great. The thing I forgot to mention, you were talking about sermons. A big part of it's stories, and of course that's what I say a good fundraising letter has a lot of stories. Can you talk about that a little bit? Well,
one of the things we learned in our homiletics class was that nobody would remember our sermons until dinner time, but they'd remember the stories that we told. Maybe. Stories stick with us longer. We can walk around inside of a story. You look at biblical stories and you read them so frequently, but there's always a surprise in them. Or you discover a different perspective if you look through the eyes of one character versus another. And I think in the church, people who have given their lives to service in the church want to hear stories of people that perhaps they haven't even met yet at the church who are doing the same thing with the same kind of passion, want to hear about a youth mission trip, and just want to hear that all of the endeavors that have meant so much to them are being perpetuated with passion.
Let me ask you this final question. Do you write handwritten notes? How do you try to engage with people, to know that they're appreciated, that they're a real person, I was reading to you a letter. I won't read it, but it was from another church, and it was so impersonal. It didn't thank the people. I mean, do you try to do that in your communications?
We do. We send out quarterly giving statements, and there's a thank you every time. I don't write handwritten thank you notes after our pledge campaign, but I think I will this year after talking with you. And I try to thank people regularly in worship. We had a time for a while when we would have people stand up and before the offering and share personally about their own gratitude. And that was very telling. People shared the most wonderful encounters inside and outside of the church for which they were grateful. And that was, I think gratitude is a very important spiritual dimension to our lives.
Well,
I think we're changed by gratitude.
I think you're touched by that. That would be one of my biggest complaints about organizations is they don't show gratitude to the donors. And I'll just read the first paragraph here, and I'll tell you what's wrong with this. On behalf of the rector and vestry, we want to thank you for your generous support of... I do like that part. That's fine. Generous support's good. But that was it. It was no personalization other than that one paragraph. over the years, it's all impersonal. As I read the thing, I won't read it again, but and it's by two signers. Two signers is usually a mistake. You want to make it you and I, and not we.
Yeah.
And the signature is just for a small church. It just doesn't. It's not personal enough. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You want to say, the person's name, if you will. Even you can cross it off and put their name in ink, if it's small enough. But I think you're right. I think gratitude is one of the best qualities, and probably people don't use enough.
It changes how we live. If
Right.
we live as grateful people, it changes how we live.
Well, I think it's also, just as Paul said, was using Macedonia to keep Corinth. It's also a tool to help your cause, showing gratitude to your donors. Not only does it make them feel good, it makes you feel good, it benefits your organization. Most people or many groups, all they want to do is brag about what they've done. We've done X, Y, Z, and they don't show hey, it's you, because of you. You could say that, but it's because of you.
There's another interesting dimension to Paul's discussions about money, and that is how the funds are going to be managed.
Oh, that's good.
He sends Titus, who is an upright man, somebody that he knows is going to be well received because of his moral uprightness, and then he tells them that when they do give their offering, they can send a delegate with them to go to Jerusalem to see how it is handed over and how it is spent.
So there's some verification there.
Absolutely.
And your books are open, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, some churches aren't like that. There was a church close to me that's somewhat famous in this area, and they wanted to know how much the pastor was making, and they said we wouldn't want to embarrass our staff.
We post our budget on the bulletin board in the hallway.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I just thought, and a friend of mine was a member of the church, and I said, well, why wouldn't you want to know that? Yeah. So anyway, well, very good. It's good seeing you again. We usually just see each other in funerals, so this is better.
It's true. It's interesting with all the connections from high school, and I can go years without seeing you, and then when I do see you, you just feel like family.
That's very good. I feel the same about you. So it's good seeing you after all these. I guess it was a few months ago at our friend Brian Danis, who was served in the Army. So. He had a funeral. I felt a lot older that day when it's somebody your age dies.
Yeah, we're too young to be burying classmates. That's true. I miss Brian very much.
Yeah. Oh, he was quite a character.
Quite a character.
Anyway, till next time, this is the Donor Doctor signing out.